The desert wind was sharp that morning, slicing through the ruins of a once mighty city. Sirte, a coastal town scorched by bombs, gutted by betrayal, and soaked in the blood of a regime's last breath. Smoke still curled from rooftops, and somewhere beneath broken concrete, a dictator was breathing his final stolen breaths. Muammar Gaddafi had once declared himself the King of Kings of Africa, a man who styled himself as the voice of the oppressed, the eternal revolutionary. He built palaces where water flowed through marble halls, hosted world leaders in tents lined with silk, and delivered speeches that echoed through unchambers like mad sermons. But behind the theatrics was a man who ruled with fear, surveillance, and violence. His prisons overflowed, his enemies vanished. His image was on every wall, his madness etched into the soul of a nation. But power, no matter how deeply rooted, cannot outrun history. In October 2011, after months of brutal civil war, NATO bombs and rebel fury closed in. The green flags fell. The people he once claimed to serve now hunted him through the ruins of his birthplace. And as the end approached, Gaddafi didn't die in a palace, nor on a battlefield. He died in a sewer, kicking, screaming, begging. This is the story of how empires rot, of how tyrants fall, and how sometimes the past dies in the gutter. Part 1. The King of Kings falls. The Mediterranean sun once kissed the marble of his compound. Opulence stretched like a shadow over Libya, anchored by the towering figure of Muammar Gaddafi, colonel, brother, leader, self-proclaimed King of Kings. For 42 years, he ruled not just a country, but a mythology of himself. He adorned his shoulders with gold, slept in Bedouin tents surrounded by Amazonian bodyguards, and declared the Jamahiriya, a state of the masses where only his word truly mattered. From Tripoli to Tobruk, from parliaments to prisons, Gaddafi's name inspired both terror and fanatic loyalty. But even tyrants bleed, and the moment came when the people, starved, enraged, disillusioned, stopped whispering and started shouting. The Arab Spring had arrived, and Libya would never be the same. It began as it always does, with fire in the streets and smoke rising from the edges of control. In February 2011, protests erupted in Benghazi. At first, just voices, but then, bullets. Gaddafi's forces fired into crowds, snipers from rooftops, arrests without records. The walls began to crack. He went on television, screaming into the lens, "I am not a president. I am not a normal person you can kill." His eyes were wide, hands trembling with theatrical rage. He blamed foreign agents, rats, hallucinogens. He promised to cleanse Libya house by house. But the more he threatened, the more the streets turned against him. Within weeks, eastern Libya slipped from his grasp. The rebels seized cities. Army defectors turned their weapons around. The green flags of the regime were replaced with revolutionary banners. But this was no peaceful revolt. Libya fractured like old bone. Civil war spilled across the desert. Tripoli tightened its grip, but the noose was already forming. As rebels pushed westward, NATO entered the arena. France, the UK, and the United States launched a bombing campaign. Gaddafi's convoys were reduced to ash. His air defenses melted into rubble. Even his own inner circle began to defect. Ministers vanished. Generals disappeared. His once feared power now relied on mercenaries and loyalist remnants with fading morale. But Gaddafi held on. Inside his heavily fortified Bab al-Assisia compound in Tripoli, he broadcasted rants to the world. Sweating, incoherent, still wearing sunglasses at night, he claimed to be a martyr. He quoted the Quran and cursed the West. His own people had turned into shadows around him. For the first time in decades, the man who had ruled from above was now looking up, fearful of the sky. In August 2011, the capital fell. Rebels stormed Bab al-Assisia. They found shattered statues of Gaddafi, his golden face broken beneath their boots. His vast labyrinth of underground tunnels lay exposed, rooms filled with luxury, velvet sofas, private cinemas, a throne carved with eagles, now silent and lifeless. but the man himself had vanished. Like a ghost slipping through cracks in the walls, he had disappeared into the chaos. He ran east, toward Sirte, his birthplace, the place where it had all begun. Gaddafi believed Sirte would never betray him, but cities do not love men, only fear them, and fear once broken does not return. There, in the shell of a bombed-out city, he built his last stand. Loyalist fighters dug trenches, set up artillery in alleys. Civilians were trapped between crumbling buildings and collapsing ideology. NATO jets circled overhead. Day and night, bombs fell. The Mediterranean glittered in the distance, indifferent. Rebels encircled Sirte, tightening the net. October 20th, 2011, Gaddafi tried to flee. At dawn, a convoy of over 30 vehicles attempted a breakout. It was a desperate move. SUVs packed with fighters, aides, and Gaddafi himself. NATO drones tracked them from above. At 8:30 a.m., French jets struck. Missiles exploded into the desert, tearing metal and flesh into smoke. Vehicles burst into flames. Survivors scrambled, screaming, crawling through sand soaked in blood. Gaddafi's vehicle was hit but not destroyed. He escaped on foot, along with his defense minister and a few bodyguards, ducking into the ruins of a housing complex under construction. There, between the shattered bricks and twisted rebar, Gaddafi hid, wounded, confused, clutching a golden pistol. His symbol of power reduced now to a useless ornament. NATO had no idea he was still alive, but the rebels were coming. From the smoke and dust, fighters from Sirte emerged, armed, furious. For them, this wasn't politics, this was personal. Sirte had suffered deeply during the war. Gaddafi's forces had laid siege to the city for months. This was not an arrest, this was a hunt. Around midday, Gaddafi and his small entourage tried to flee once more. In the chaos, they found cover in the most humiliating of places. A concrete storm drain, a round pipe, half submerged in mud and debris. There, the man who had once called himself the son of Africa cowered, his robe filthy, his face bleeding. His guards were dying around him, and inside that narrow pipe, he waited, a fallen god, hiding in the sewage of his kingdom. When the rebels found him, they dragged him out like prey. His face was swollen, his body weak. Footage from cell phones shows the moment. Chaotic, horrifying, raw. He begged, not for mercy, but for understanding. "What did I do to you?" he cried, looking into the eyes of boys whose fathers had vanished into his prisons. The crowd exploded in rage. They punched, kicked, struck him with their rifles. The golden pistol was seized. The once immortal leader now whimpered under boots. There was no trial, no court, just rage. Moments later, a bullet ended it. Some say he was shot in the stomach first. Others say he was sodomized with a bayonet before the final shot. The truth is blurred by fury. What is certain is this: Gaddafi died in the dirt, on camera, surrounded by jeering men and the rising dust of his own ruin. His body was thrown onto the hood of a pickup truck, driven through the streets like a prize. Crowds gathered. Children climbed over his corpse. Some laughed, some spat, others just stared, unsure of what they were looking at. Libya's revolution had claimed its greatest symbol, but the victory felt strange, hollow, brutal. The body was taken to Sirte, stored in a meat locker to be viewed by the public. Men, women, and children filed past the corpse. Some wept, some filmed it with their phones. His eyes remained half open, mouth slack, a dictator exposed not just in death, but in decomposition. Eventually, the calls for burial grew louder. Islam demands that dead be buried quickly, but no grave was safe. The National Transitional Council refused to say where he was finally laid to rest. Some claim he was buried in the desert, in a secret location, along with his son Muammar and former defense minister. Others believe his remains were destroyed to prevent martyrdom. All that remained was memory. Muammar Gaddafi's end was not the fall of a man. It was the collapse of a delusion, a theatrical, blood-soaked fantasy where one man claimed to be the soul of a nation. But the people do not forget. the tortured, the silenced, the mothers who never saw their sons again. History closed its hand around him, and when it squeezed, nothing was left but dust and video footage. The palace is gone, the green flags torn, and somewhere beneath the sun, the desert keeps its silence. Part 2. Blood in the dust. Gaddafi's final crawl. The dust settled over Sirte, but the blood did not. In the days following Gaddafi's death, Libya stood frozen between the illusion of freedom and the horror of what had been done. In the alleyways where children once played, the echoes of gunfire still lingered. The city, once a proud jewel of the Mediterranean coast, now wore the bruises of a war it didn't choose. Rubble choked the roads. Blackened bodies lay in shallow graves. The sea lapped quietly at the shore, indifferent to the violence that had unfolded inland. In a meat locker in Sirte, under the flickering buzz of fluorescent light, the body of Muammar Gaddafi began to rot. His final expression was preserved by the cold. Lips parted, skin stained with dirt and blood. The face of a man who once ruled a nation now displayed like an animal carcass. Crowds came. Some gawked, some cursed. A few whispered prayers, others took photos. Here was the end of an era, wrapped in plastic and silence. There was no dignity left, not in the smell, not in the pose, not in the handling of the corpse. No state funeral, no military salute, just a cracked meat freezer, tucked away behind a misrotten market, guarded by teenagers with AKs and cigarette burns on their fingers. They called it justice, they called it victory. But beneath their eyes was something else, a tremor, a haunting recognition that power, once shattered, splinters in unpredictable directions. The National Transitional Council, eager to present control, fumbled with what came next. Should they bury him, display him longer, destroy the remains? Every answer brought danger. A tomb could become a shrine. A disappearance would birth conspiracy. Eventually, in the deep stillness of night, they buried him in an unmarked grave, somewhere in the desert. Only a few officials knew the location. No prayer, no monument, just dust. He was laid to rest near his son Mutassim, who had been captured, mocked, and executed within hours of his father. But death didn't erase Gaddafi. If anything, it multiplied him. In the vacuum that followed, his ghost began to stir. Loyalists denied the footage, claimed it was faked. Some whispered that he escaped, that a double had been killed. Others clung to the idea of resurrection. The brother leader will return, one defector claimed in a video months later. His voice still speaks to the oppressed. His voice had spoken once, but it had spoken in violence. In green books, printed by the millions, Gaddafi outlined a strange hybrid of socialism, Islam, tribalism, and dictatorship. He rejected democracy, calling it a fraud. In his vision, Libya needed no representation, only the direct voice of the people, channeled through committees he personally controlled. Behind this smokescreen of ideology was a regime built on fear. Entire families disappeared overnight. Torture chambers were standard protocol. Intelligence agencies monitored every whisper, every dissent, every foreign conversation. He crushed the Islamists, then claimed to defend Islam. He mocked the West, then dined with European kings. In 2009, he stood at the UN and ranted for over 90 minutes, tearing pages from his notes, throwing the assembly into discomfort. He demanded trillions in reparations for Africa. He called Barack Obama my son. He pitched the idea of a single African currency backed by gold. World leaders dismissed him as eccentric. But inside Libya, no one laughed. They were too busy surviving. His fall was not simply the end of a government. It was the explosion of decades of pressure, paranoia, and rage. But the explosion had no direction. When Tripoli fell, when Gaddafi died, there was no roadmap. Only factions, tribes, militias, old grudges ignited in new flames. What had begun as a popular uprising against tyranny soon morphed into something far darker. Power-hungry warlords filled the vacuum. Islamists rose. Foreign weapons flooded in. Extremists carved out territories. Misrata, and Zintan fought for dominance. Benghazi descended into chaos. By 2014, a full-blown second civil war erupted. Libya fractured into east and west, to governments, multiple armies, countless militias. Human trafficking boomed. Migrants were sold in open-air slave markets. ISIS seized parts of Sirte, the very city where Gaddafi had fallen, and made it a stronghold of executions, beheadings, and black banners. International powers returned, not as liberators, but as chess players. Russia, Turkey, Egypt, France, each backing their proxy, each feeding the fire. And in the midst of it all, some Libyans began to look back. They remembered the chaos, the hunger, the endless checkpoints. Some even missed the order, however brutal, of the old regime. A dangerous nostalgia crept in. Songs once banned were sung again. Posters re-emerged in alleys. Children born after the revolution asked, who was Gaddafi? And the answers came, twisted, blurred, incomplete. A monster, a father, a god, a madman, a martyr. The truth is harder to pin down than a corpse in the desert. History remembers images, not complexities, not contradictions. Just a face, covered in blood, dragged from a drain pipe. That moment, filmed in shaky hands, yelled over by chants and gunshots, became Libya's defining rupture. It wasn't the calm end of tyranny. It was a warning, written in flesh. Tyrants rarely die quietly, and when they fall, they often pull the nation down with them. Gaddafi believed he was Libya. For decades, he crafted a state in his own reflection. When the mirror shattered, the fragments cut everyone. The hospitals ran out of supplies, schools were shelled, oil terminals were seized by warlords, and the people, those who once cheered in the streets, found themselves caught in the wreckage of their own uprising. It wasn't just Gaddafi who was buried in the desert. It was the illusion that freedom, once won, would arrive fully formed. Revolutions rarely end at the moment of victory. They continue, messy and slow, haunted by the very thing they tried to destroy. Gaddafi's final crawl into that drainage pipe wasn't just a last act of desperation. It was a symbol, a regime returning to the filth it came from. His end was not noble. It was not glorious. It was stripped of mythology. The world saw it, raw, visceral, and it reminded everyone watching that power, once untouchable, is only ever a few wrong steps away from collapse. Today, Libya remains divided, scarred, fragile. Its people are weary, its land soaked in debts unpaid and wounds unhealed. The country is trying, slowly, painfully, to rebuild, to imagine a future without shadows. But the past is heavy, and sometimes it breathes. There are no statues left of Gaddafi, no more green books, no parades, but there are scars, on buildings, on bodies, on the map itself. And beneath the soil, in that secret grave beneath the desert stars, lies the man who once declared himself eternal. He wasn't. He died with a gun to his head, in a pipe filled with dirt, kicked and spat on by the people he once ruled. A fitting end for a tyrant, a chilling lesson for the future. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.